They called his sons monsters on national television and sent strangers to take them away. They thought they were attacking 3 broken children. They were wrong. Welcome back to the Blissful Whispers. We're so glad to have you here for another emotional journey. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if you're ready for this incredible story of a family's resilience, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. The silence was the most damning part. It seeped into the vast, sunlit great room of the Preston estate, a space designed for minimalist calm, now a monument to chaos. Splatters of vibrant tempera paint, a furious Jackson Pollock-esque mural, adorned a single white wall worth more than a suburban home. An overturned Italian leather sofa bled its feathery stuffing into the air, the white tufts drifting like a gentle, mocking snowfall over the carnage. At the center of it all, the glittering shards of what was once a priceless ceramic vase lay scattered across the polished concrete floor like fallen stars. This wasn't the mess of children playing, it was the wreckage of a siege. Standing before the devastation were its architects, Leo, Max, and Owen Preston. 6 years old, identical in their dark hair and piercing blue eyes, yet starkly distinct in their defiance. Leo, the self-appointed general, stood with his small shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. Max, the artist of this destruction, had a smear of red paint across his cheek, his fist still clenched. And Owen, the quietest, clutched a worn stuffed wolf to his chest, its one button eye staring blankly at the scene. They were a united front, a tiny army defending a fortress of grief. Before them, Nanny number 17, a woman named Helen who had arrived a week ago with a PhD in child development and a suitcase full of optimistic theories, was visibly trembling. Her neat bun had come undone, and a single feather was caught in her hair. She stared at the triplets, her breath coming in ragged little gasps. It was Owen who broke the crushing silence. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a shard of the broken vase. "Mama wouldn't like you." Leo's gaze, cold and steady, met Helen's. "She's not our mama," he added, the words flat and final. That was the signal. Max, without a word, drew his arm back and hurled a small die-cast toy car. It wasn't aimed to hurt, but to punctuate. The metal car clattered harmlessly at Helen's feet, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. But it was the final blow. A strangled sob escaped Helen's throat, a sound of utter defeat. She shrieked, a raw, high-pitched sound of frayed nerves finally snapping, and turned, fleeing the mansion as if escaping a fire. The front door slammed shut, and silence descended once more. But the triplets didn't celebrate their victory. They didn't high-five or exchange triumphant smiles. They simply watched the door, their identical faces unmoving. In the stillness you could see it clearly, not the glint of malice in their eyes, but the hollow, haunted look of children who had just confirmed their deepest, most terrifying belief, that everyone, eventually, leaves. The silence that followed was heavier than any of the chaos that had preceded it. High above the fog-kissed sprawl of San Francisco, Cole Preston's office was a shrine to control. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a god's-eye view of the Bay Bridge, a majestic steel spine stitching the city together. The air was cool and filtered, the surfaces were polished chrome and stark white, and every object on his vast desk was aligned with geometric precision. It was a world he had built, a kingdom he commanded. Yet, the magnificent vista was lost on him. His entire universe was contained in the glowing rectangle of his phone, his thumb hovering over his assistant's name. When the call finally came through, he answered before the first ring finished. "She's gone." Anya's voice was clipped, professional, but laced with an exhaustion that mirrored his own. "Helen left about an hour ago." She cited. "Psychological warfare." Cole closed his eyes. The words were absurd, melodramatic, yet he knew they were true from the nanny's perspective. "And the agency? They're dropping us, Cole. Effective immediately. We've been blacklisted. No one in their network will take the position." The familiar vice tightened around his chest, a cold, crushing pressure of grief and guilt. Blacklisted. It was official. His sons were unmanageable, and he, the titan of tech, the visionary CEO of Apex Innovations, was a catastrophic failure as a father. The pristine office faded away, replaced by the slick, dark ribbon of a rain-lashed highway. 6 months ago. The sound of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. He was on a conference call, pacing the living room, closing a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Annoyed. Distracted. Claire had kissed his cheek, her smile a beacon of warmth in the gray afternoon. "I'll be right back," she'd whispered, pulling on her coat. "I forgot the gift for tonight." "Don't worry, it's a surprise. An anniversary gift." He'd barely looked up, just grunted an affirmative, his mind already 3 steps ahead in the negotiation. He hadn't even said, "I love you." The next call he received wasn't from his legal team. The memory was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He had drowned himself in work ever since, building his empire higher and higher as if the sheer altitude could distance him from the wreckage on the ground. Work was logical. It had rules. Effort yielded results. At home, there were no rules, only the raw, chaotic pain of 3 little boys who looked at him with their mother's eyes and saw a stranger. He knew he was failing them, abandoning them emotionally just as he had been distracted in those final moments with his wife. The guilt was a poison, and his work was the only antidote he knew. "Cole? Are you there?" Anya's voice pulled him back from the precipice. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough. He stared out at the bay, at the thousands of lives moving in predictable patterns. He was out of predictable patterns. Out of conventional solutions. "What do you want me to do?" Anya asked, her tone softening. "There are no other agencies willing to." "Post an ad," Cole interrupted, the idea forming from sheer desperation. "Online. Craigslist, a caregiver site, I don't care. Make it anonymous. Just list the basics. Atherton Estate. 3 boys." "Cole, that's incredibly risky," Anya warned, her professionalism kicking back in. "You have no idea who you'll attract. It's a security nightmare." "Then offer a salary that buys their silence and their sanity," he shot back, the frustration boiling over. "Double the standard rate. Triple it. I don't care. I can't go home to that silence again." He was a man with infinite resources, but he was bankrupt of hope. He ignored Anya's hesitant protests, his decision made. He was out of options. It was time to throw money at the fire and pray it didn't just add to the flames. Across the bay, in a small, meticulously tidy apartment in Oakland, the rain painted shimmering, distorted streaks down the window panes. The soft drumming sound was the only soundtrack to Nora Cassidy's evening ritual of hope and rejection as she scrolled through online job boards. The glow of her laptop cast a pale blue light on her face, illuminating a flicker of dejection in her eyes. Each listing blurred into the next. Upbeat, energetic nanny needed for happy family in Marin, must have early childhood education degree, perfect driving record required. It was a sea of perfect families looking for perfect candidates, and Nora, despite her years of experience, felt perpetually on the outside looking in. Her past wasn't something she listed on a resume, but it was her greatest qualification. It lived on her bookshelf, not in a framed degree, but in the worn, cracked spine of a child psychology textbook she'd read a dozen times. It sat on her nightstand in a single faded photograph of 2 smiling faces. Her parents, frozen in a moment of happiness before a fire had turned her world to ash. Nora had navigated the rest of her childhood through the cold, transient landscape of the foster care system. A life of never truly belonging had taught her a rare language. She could read the silent, desperate pain behind a child's defiant eyes. She knew that the kids who screamed the loudest were often the ones who felt the most unheard. Her finger hovered over the mouse, ready to close the laptop for the night, when a new listing caught her eye. It was different from the others, vague, anonymous, and almost foreboding. Seeking caregiver for 3 energetic boys. Atherton Estate. Challenging position. Discretion required. Competitive salary. There was no picture of a smiling family. No list of cheerful duties. Challenging position and discretion required were giant red flags, the kind of corporate speak that screamed, "Our kids are out of control and we don't want anyone to know." Most applicants would have scrolled past it in a heartbeat. But for Nora, it was a signal flare. Challenging wasn't a warning, it was a symptom. Energetic was a euphemism. Her intuition sparked. A quick search followed, high-profile family Atherton 3 sons. The results were immediate and heartbreaking. News articles, dated 6 months prior, filled the screen with headlines about the tragic death of Claire Preston, beloved philanthropist and wife of tech titan Cole Preston, in a fatal car accident. She was survived by her husband and their 6-year-old triplet sons. Nora's breath caught in her throat. The pieces clicked into place with a painful, resonant clarity. These weren't energetic boys. They were grieving boys. They were lost. They were terrified. They were building walls, lashing out at a world that had stolen their mother, pushing everyone away before they could be heard again. She knew this script because she had lived it herself. Her dejection vanished, replaced by a surge of purpose. She opened a new document. The application she wrote wasn't a list of her past jobs or her skills in meal preparation. It was a letter raw and honest. She didn't mention her own parents directly, but she wrote of understanding what it feels like when your world shatters. She wrote about how anger in children is just grief with nowhere to go. It wasn't a professional resume, it was a heartfelt confession of understanding, a quiet message sent from one broken heart to 3 others, promising not to fix them, but to simply sit with them in the wreckage. She hit send, and for the first time all night felt a glimmer of hope. The Preston mansion was less a home and more a modern art museum carved from glass, steel, and stone. As Nora Cassidy stepped into the cavernous entryway, her footsteps echoed softly on the polished limestone floors. A monolithic sculpture stood in one corner, and an abstract painting that probably cost more than her apartment building dominated a towering wall. But Nora's eyes barely registered them. She was drawn to a series of smaller frames arranged in a warm, intimate cluster on an adjacent wall. Family photos. A laughing Claire with her arms around 3 tiny boys on a sun-drenched beach. Cole, looking years younger, holding his sons in his lap. It was a gallery of a life that no longer existed, and Nora felt a familiar ache of recognition. She was led to a stark home office where Cole Preston stood waiting. He looked exactly like his press photos, sharp, intelligent, and radiating an aura of intense control, but up close Nora saw the fine lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. The interview began, and it was as tense and sterile as the room itself. Cole sat behind a massive desk, his posture rigid, asking clipped questions about her experience and qualifications. He was a CEO conducting a hiring, looking for a solution to a problem he could quantify and manage. Nora let him finish, then took a steadying breath. "Mr. Preston," she began, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the corporate formality. "With all due respect, I don't think your sons are a management problem." Cole paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "What are they then?" "They're a heartbreak problem," Nora said simply. The words hung in the air, dismantling his entire approach. "And you can't manage a heartbreak. You can only sit with it." She saw a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, in his eyes and pressed on, not for pity, but to establish her unique credentials. "My parents died when I was 7. I spent the next 11 years in the foster system. I know what it's like to be so scared that everyone you love will leave you that you decide to give them a reason. I know what it's like to push and push and push because making someone leave hurts less than waiting for them to abandon you." Cole stared at her, the professional mask finally cracking. For 6 months, he had been presented with strategies, disciplinary tactics, and behavioral plans. He had been told his sons were difficult, defiant, and disturbed. No one had ever told him they were just like him, heartbroken. Nora wasn't offering to control his children, she was offering to connect with their pain. For the first time since the rain-slicked highway, a genuine, unfamiliar feeling flickered to life within his chest. It was hope. A tiny, fragile spark in an overwhelming darkness. He leaned forward, his voice stripped of its executive authority, raw and weary. "When can you start?" The air in the Preston kitchen was thick and cloyingly sweet, the scent of a pancake house that had been ransacked by Vikings. It was a war zone, but the ammunition had been maple syrup. Amber rivers of it oozed down the white marble countertops, pooling on the limestone floor in sticky, treacherous lakes. The stainless steel refrigerator was finger-painted with it, a chaotic mural of handprints and abstract drips. One of the boys had clearly attempted to climb the pantry door, leaving a perfect, sticky silhouette of his sneakers behind. At the center of this sugary devastation stood Leo, Max, and Owen, their hair matted, their clothes soaked, their faces smeared with the evidence of their coordinated attack. They held their empty plastic syrup bottles like spent weapons, their small bodies rigid with anticipation. This was the final exam, the one that had a 100% failure rate. They had perfected the art of breaking adults, and they stood waiting with the cold, practiced patience of executioners, for Nora Cassidy to scream, or cry, or best of all to turn and flee. Nora appeared in the doorway, a thermos in one hand. She stopped dead, her eyes taking in the sheer, sticky totality of the scene. The boys braced themselves. Leo's jaw was set in a hard line. Max wore a smirk of pure defiance. Owen, clutching his stuffed wolf, simply watched, his expression a mask of guarded neutrality. This was the moment. The air crackled with their unspoken challenge. Then, Nora did something that defied all their calculations. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous titter or a sarcastic chuckle. It was a genuine, warm, belly-deep laugh that echoed in the high-ceilinged kitchen. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated amusement. The boys' expressions faltered, their unified front instantly fracturing into bewilderment. "Wow," Nora said, shaking her head as she stepped carefully into the chaos, her shoes making a tacky peeling sound with each step. "Okay. 10 out of 10 for creativity. The sneaker print on the pantry is a particularly artistic touch." The boys are testing Nora, trying to push her away with chaos just like so many people do when they're hurting. If you believe that understanding is more powerful than judgment, hit that like button. Only bullies and trolls think shouting is the answer. She didn't scold. She didn't lecture. She didn't even sigh. She navigated the sticky floor as if it were a perfectly normal obstacle course, pulled out a chair from the island, wiping a dollop of syrup from the seat with a napkin, and sat down, placing her thermos on the table. She was in the mess with them, a calm island in their sugary storm. The boys stared, utterly disarmed. This wasn't in their playbook. "I'm Nora, by the way," she said, looking at each of them in turn. Her gaze was kind, without a hint of the anger or frustration they were experts at provoking. Leo, recovering first, found his voice. He puffed out his small chest, the general rallying his troops. "We don't want another nanny," he declared, his tone as firm as he could manage. Nora smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't mock him. "Good," she said cheerfully. "Because I'm not one. Nannies are for kids who need to be managed. I'm more of a professional fort builder, a monster under the bed checker, and a specialist in top-secret pancake recipes." She reached into the tote bag she'd placed on a miraculously clean corner of the counter and pulled out a large Ziploc bag filled with thick, golden-brown cookies. The rich scent of chocolate and butter cut through the cloying smell of syrup, an immediate, enticing aroma. "I brought these," she continued, placing the bag in the center of the sticky island. "They're chocolate chip. They were my mom's favorite. She used to say they could solve almost any problem." The mention of her mom hung in the air, a quiet, unexpected note of shared humanity. The triplets exchanged uncertain glances. They were still suspicious, their loyalty to their mission warring with the undeniable allure of the cookies and the bewildering calm of this new woman. Max eyed the bag, his defiant smirk gone, replaced by curiosity. Leo's stony expression wavered. He was the leader, the protector. He couldn't be the first to surrender. But Owen, the quiet observer, took a small, hesitant step forward. He looked at his brothers, then back at Nora. He saw no trap in her eyes, only an open, patient kindness. With a tiny, almost imperceptible nod to himself, he reached out a sticky hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before closing around a large cookie. He brought it to his mouth and took a bite. As he chewed, a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure softened his guarded features. It was the first crack in their armor. It wasn't a surrender, it was a truce, brokered by a cookie and an unexpected laugh in the face of chaos. Nora understood that trust wasn't a fortress to be stormed, but a series of bridges to be built, plank by patient plank. The week that followed the syrup war was a masterclass in emotional architecture. She didn't force schedules or impose rules. She observed, listened, and waited for the boys to reveal the blueprints of their broken hearts. Each test they threw at her was not a declaration of war, but an invitation to understand their unique language of pain. Max was the first to issue a direct challenge. In the sunroom designated as their art space, he accidentally tipped a jar of crimson paint, a thick, blood-red wave splashing across Nora's clean jeans. It was a deliberate act, a dare flung in a splash of color. He waited, his small body tensed for the inevitable explosion of adult frustration. Instead, Nora looked down at the mess on her leg, then back at him, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Great idea," she said, her voice full of genuine enthusiasm. She grabbed a large, empty canvas from a nearby easel and propped it on the floor. "That's a powerful color. Let's make some art that shows exactly how angry we feel. Before Max could process this, Nora dipped her own fingers in a jar of black paint and made a furious, jagged streak across the canvas. She looked at him, her eyes inviting, not commanding. Hesitantly at first, then with a cathartic fury, Max joined her. They spent the next hour attacking the canvas with reds and blacks and angry blues, a messy, vibrant, silent conversation of shared rage. It wasn't about making something pretty, it was about making their feelings visible, and for the first time, Max felt seen instead of scolded. Owen's test was one of absence. Nora found him one afternoon not by sight, but by the profound silence emanating from his room. He was gone. A frantic search ended at the walk-in closet in the master bedroom, the door shut tight. Her first instinct was to open it, to coax him out, to assure him everything was okay. But she knew that would be an invasion. Instead, she respected his fortress. She simply sat down on the plush carpet outside the door, her back against the cool wood. She didn't speak to him, not at first. She just sat, a quiet, unthreatening presence. After a few minutes, she began to tell a story, her voice soft and low, directed at the door. "There was once a young wolf," she began, "who was the quietest in his pack. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest, but he saw everything. When a great storm came and scared everyone, he found the safest part of the den and protected his family just by being watchful and brave." She didn't ask him to come out. She simply stayed, her story a gentle bridge into his silent world. An hour later, the door creaked open and Owen emerged, his stuffed wolf clutched tight, and sat beside her without a word. Leo, the little general, tested her authority. He saw her not as a threat to be destroyed, but as a rival commander. He issued orders to his brothers, deliberately countermanding any gentle suggestion Nora made. He was protecting his family, asserting his role as the man of the house. Nora never engaged him in a power struggle. She waited for a quiet moment when it was just the two of them watching his brothers play. "It's a big job, isn't it?" she said softly. Leo looked at her, his expression wary. "What is?" he asked. "Protecting them," Nora replied, nodding towards Max and Owen. "Making sure they're safe. That's your job, right?" Leo gave a stiff, prideful nod. Nora met his gaze, her expression full of respect, not pity. "You're very good at it," she said. "But the best leaders, the bravest generals, know that the smart move isn't to carry the whole world on their own shoulders. The best way to protect your brothers is to let someone help you carry the weight." She wasn't trying to take his job, she was offering to be his lieutenant. She saw the heavy burden on his small shoulders visibly lighten. Cole's rival, Julian Vance, built his empire by exploiting people's weaknesses. He'd see this family's pain as a liability, a vulnerability to be leveraged. If you think compassion is a strength, not a weakness, subscribe to this channel. Only corporate vultures like Vance would disagree. From the periphery, Cole watched these small miracles unfold. He saw them through the security cameras he monitored from his office, and then, increasingly, in person. He started wrapping up his meetings early, the magnetic pull of his desk weakening against the gravitational pull of his own home. He'd walk in not to a tense, echoing silence, but to the sound of quiet storytelling outside a closet door, or the sight of a furiously beautiful painting drying on an easel. He saw Nora not as Nanny number 18, but as an alchemist, spinning the straw of his son's grief into threads of gold. He witnessed moments of connection he had long since given up on, and for the first time in 6 agonizing months, Cole Preston felt less like the grieving CEO of a broken household and more like a father. He was part of a family again. The great room, once a canvas of chaos, was now a sanctuary of quiet collaboration. The lingering scent of citrus and polish had replaced the phantom smell of syrup. Sunlight streamed through the immaculate floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating not wreckage but creation. In the center of the floor, the Preston family was on their knees, a sprawling, intricate castle of colorful magnetic tiles rising between them. There was no shouting, no conflict, only the soft, satisfying click of magnets finding their place. It was a symphony of teamwork. Leo, the little general, was now the master architect, his brow furrowed in concentration as he directed the placement of a towering spire. "We need a buttress here," he'd command softly, and a small hand would provide the necessary piece. Max, the artist of destruction, had channeled his talents into design, meticulously arranging translucent tiles to catch the light, creating vibrant stained glass windows. His touch was now gentle, his focus absolute. And Owen, the quiet observer, was the kingdom's official historian, carefully populating the finished courtyards with a menagerie of small animal figures, his stuffed wolf presiding over them all from the highest turret. Cole was no longer a spectator. He was on the floor with them, his suit jacket and tie discarded, his sleeves rolled up. He held pieces steady for Leo and offered suggestions to Max, his presence a warm, grounding force. Nora sat beside him, a quiet partner in this fragile piece, her role shifting from crisis manager to a cherished part of the landscape. She was the architect of this moment, and the gratitude in Cole's heart felt as vast and bright as the room itself. As Leo carefully placed the final tile on the tallest tower, a hush fell over the group. They all sat back on their heels, admiring their shared creation. The castle was magnificent, a kaleidoscope of color and light. It was Owen who finally spoke, his voice soft but clear, filled with a simple, profound truth. He wasn't looking at the castle but up at the ceiling as if he could see straight through it to the sky beyond. "We're building a castle for Mama in heaven," he said. "So she has a pretty place to live." The word struck Cole with the force of a physical blow, but this time the impact didn't shatter him. It filled him. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the beautiful castle into a swirl of color. These weren't the familiar, ragged tears of guilt or loss. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. His sons were remembering their mother not with anger but with love. They were building something beautiful from their pain. He caught Nora's eye across the magnetic kingdom. In her gaze he saw a deep, unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of the monumental distance they had traveled. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a feeling so potent it was almost a promise. They had done it. They had weathered the storm. For the first time, a future for his family felt not just possible but bright. They believed in that perfect, sunlit moment that they had finally turned a corner. The fragile peace of the afternoon had blossomed into a rare, tranquil evening. A fire crackled softly in the grand fireplace, casting a warm, flickering glow across the great room. The boys, bathed and in their pajamas, were curled up together on a large sofa, a single blanket draped over them. Nora sat on the floor beside them, her voice a low, soothing murmur as she read from a well-loved book about a boy who could talk to animals. Cole sat in a nearby armchair, not looking at his phone or a tablet but simply watching. He watched the way Owen's head rested on Leo's shoulder, the way Max's eyes grew heavy with sleep, the way Nora's presence seemed to knit them all together into something whole. It was a perfect, ordinary moment, the kind he had thought was lost to him forever. A glimmer of normalcy that felt more valuable than his entire stock portfolio. That's when the buzz shattered the silence. It was Cole's phone lying face down on the side table. A single sharp vibration. Not a call but a high-priority news alert. He ignored it, a reflex born of wanting to protect this perfect moment. But it was followed by another and then another. A cascade of notifications. A knot of professional dread tightened in his stomach. Had a server crashed? A deal fallen through? He reluctantly picked up the phone. The headline on the screen was not about Apex Innovations. It was about him. Bay Area Nightly News exclusive. Inside the troubled world of Silicon Valley billionaire Cole Preston. Sources allege child neglect, uncontrollable airs. The blood drained from his face. "Nora," he said, his voice a strained whisper. She looked up, her story faltering as she saw his expression. He didn't need to explain. He just turned the TV to the local news channel. The anchor, a woman with a severe haircut and a predatory smile, was looking directly into the camera. "A story of privilege and pain," she was saying as a dramatic, pulsating soundtrack began. "Behind the pristine gates of one of Atherton's most exclusive estates, a tragedy is unfolding." We spoke with former employees who paint a disturbing picture of life inside the Preston family. The screen cut to a woman with her face obscured by shadows. It was Helen, Nanny number 17. Her voice, however, was crystal clear. "It was a war zone," she said, her tone trembling with manufactured fear. "The children are volatile. They destroy property, they were verbally abusive. I was genuinely afraid for my safety." Leo, now fully awake, sat bolt upright. "That's the lady who ran away," he whispered, his voice small and confused. The segment cut to another shadowed figure, a woman Nora didn't recognize. "The father is never there," the second nanny said, her voice dripping with condemnation. "He's completely absent." These boys have no structure, no discipline. They're crying out for help and he's at the office until midnight. In my professional opinion, they are deeply disturbed. Flashy graphics filled the screen, problem heirs, a father's neglect? The boys' own faces appeared in family photos, their eyes blurred out, but it was unmistakably them, standing next to their smiling mother. The anchor's voiceover was ruthless, weaving a narrative of a cold, negligent father and 3 monstrous children. Owen had started to tremble, burrowing his face into his stuffed wolf. Max's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and a familiar, simmering anger. "Why are they saying that, Daddy?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why are they lying? The media just twisted a family's private pain into a public spectacle for clicks and ratings, all to benefit a hidden enemy. Comment "Truth Matters" below if you're sick of manipulative media. People who thrive on lies and gossip won't." Cole couldn't answer. He was frozen, a spectator at his own public execution. He felt Nora's hand on his arm, a small, grounding pressure in the swirling vortex of horror. The segment ended with the anchor promising a follow-up investigation into the Preston problem. The screen returned to the sterile news desk, but the poison of the story lingered in the room, thick and suffocating. As if on cue, a sharp, jarring sound cut through the stunned silence. The doorbell. Every head snapped towards the front of the house. No one was expecting visitors. A cold dread, colder than any he had felt since the day of Claire's accident, washed over Cole. He walked to the door on unsteady legs, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the frosted glass, he could see the silhouette of a courier in a branded uniform. He opened the door, and the man handed him a crisp, legal-sized envelope and a stylus to sign a digital pad. Cole scrawled a shaky signature, took the envelope and shut the door, the world outside feeling hostile and predatory. He tore it open with trembling fingers. The letterhead was stark, official, and utterly terrifying. San Mateo County Family and Children's Services. His eyes scanned the dense, bureaucratic text, but certain phrases leaped out at him as if they were on fire. Following multiple anonymous reports, allegations of child endangerment and neglect. An official investigation has been launched. A home visit is required. They were coming for his sons. This wasn't just a smear campaign. It was an attack, and this letter was a declaration of war. He felt the world tilt on its axis, the floor seeming to drop away beneath him. And at that exact moment his private phone rang. The one with the unlisted, encrypted number that only a handful of people had. He fumbled it out of his pocket. The screen read, "Blocked caller." He answered, his throat dry. "Hello." The voice on the other end was a low, digitally distorted rasp, a sound scraped from the bottom of a machine. It was cold, genderless, and utterly devoid of humanity. Claire's accident, the voice rasped, wasn't an accident. Cole's blood turned to ice. "Stay away from the Apex merger," the voice continued, a clear, unmistakable threat. "Or you'll lose them too." Click. The line went dead. Cole stood motionless in the center of the room. The damning news report still echoed from the television. The chilling official letter from Child Protective Services was clutched in one white-knuckled fist. The phone, now silent, was a black mirror in his other hand, the distorted voice still ringing in his ears. He stared blankly ahead, the 3 pieces of the nightmare clicking into place. His son's grief. His wife's death. His biggest business deal. It wasn't random. It wasn't a tragedy spiraling out of control. It was a coordinated, multi-front assault. His family wasn't just grieving, they were being hunted. The world outside the Preston estate's gates had transformed overnight into a ravenous beast. By dawn, the quiet, tree-lined street was choked with satellite vans and photographers, their long-lensed cameras aimed at the house like sniper rifles. The air, once filled with the sound of birdsong, now hummed with the incessant insect-like whir of drones hovering just beyond the property line, their single red eyes recording every flicker of movement behind the glass walls. The house was no longer a home, it was a fishbowl, and they were the frantic, trapped fish. Inside, the siege had taken its toll. The boys were terrified. They had retreated from the massive windows as if the glass were radioactive, huddling in the center of the house. "Why are those people here?" Owen asked, his voice trembling as he pointed a shaky finger at a drone hovering near the sunroom. "Did we do something bad again?" Max, ever the conduit for the family's anger, kicked at the leg of a sofa. They're liars. Why are they all liars? Leo, trying to maintain his role as protector, stood stiffly, but his wide, frightened eyes betrayed him. He looked at Cole, his expression pleading for an answer his father didn't have. While Cole felt the walls of his own control crumbling, Nora became their shield. She understood that she couldn't fight the army outside, but she could fortify the castle within. With a determined energy, she began pulling every cushion, blanket, and sheet she could find into the great room. "We're not going to let the outside world in today," she announced, her voice a beacon of cheerful defiance. "Today we're building the world's greatest fortress." Together they constructed a sprawling, magical fort, a labyrinth of soft walls and secret passages that blocked out the prying eyes and muffled the constant clicks of the cameras. Inside their cocoon, with flashlights and stacks of books, she created an oasis of determined normalcy, a safe bubble where the monsters outside couldn't reach them. But the tension was a palpable thing, a low hum of anxiety that even the most enchanting story couldn't completely erase. While Nora managed the emotional front line, Cole retreated to his office and went to war. The helpless, grieving father was gone, replaced by the ruthless, focused CEO he was known to be. He made one call to a number that wasn't in his regular contacts. "Kenzie," he said, his voice hard as steel. "I need you. Money is no object. I want to know who tipped off the press and CPS. And I want to know now." Kenzie, a private investigator with a reputation for surgical precision and a complete lack of sentimentality, worked with terrifying efficiency. She wasn't interested in the family drama. She was interested in the data trail. Within hours she had a lead. The anonymous tips to the news station and the CPS hotline had come from two separate burner phones. But the phones had been purchased at the same electronics store, 10 minutes apart, with a corporate credit card. A sloppy, arrogant mistake. The card was registered to a shell corporation called Argent Ventures. Kenzie's fingers flew across her keyboard, her digital crowbar prying open firewalls and encrypted databases. She followed the money. Argent Ventures was funded by another holding company, which was in turn owned by a larger private equity firm. At the top of the pyramid, sitting like a spider in the center of a vast, invisible web, was one name: Julian Vance. The name hit Cole like a physical blow. Vance was his biggest rival, a man whose ambition was matched only by his complete lack of a moral compass. And it all clicked into place. Apex Innovations was on the verge of a massive, game-changing merger. Cole's position was secure, his vision for the company unassailable. But if the board believed he was an unstable, negligent father embroiled in a public scandal, if they thought his focus was compromised, they might lose faith. Vance wasn't just trying to smear him. He was trying to trigger a no-confidence vote, to make Cole seem like a liability so he could sweep in with a hostile takeover bid. The news story, the CPS investigation, the threatening phone call about Claire, it was all leverage. A brutal, meticulously planned corporate strategy. Vance had found Cole's greatest vulnerability, his grieving children, and had weaponized their pain for profit. Julian Vance is willing to destroy a grieving family to close a business deal. This is the kind of toxic greed that ruins lives. Hit subscribe if you believe people should always come before profits. Only heartless corporate sharks like Vance would scroll away. The house was unnervingly quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging just beyond its walls. The drones had retreated for the night, and the paparazzi had been pushed back by a newly hired security team, but their presence lingered like a toxic residue. Inside Cole's office, the air was thick with a tense, strategic silence. Legal pads covered the desk, filled with Nora's neat handwriting outlining routines and Cole's jagged scrawl listing potential questions the social worker might ask. They were preparing for the next day's visit from Child Protective Services, trying to assemble a defense for a crime they hadn't committed. Every potential answer felt inadequate, a flimsy shield against a phantom accusation. What if she asks about the syrup incident? Cole murmured, rubbing his temples. How do we explain that without sounding like we let them run wild? We tell the truth, Nora said, her voice a steady anchor in his sea of anxiety. We explain that it wasn't a tantrum, it was a test. We explain how we handled it with connection, not punishment. Before Cole could reply, his private phone vibrated, the screen flashing with Kenzie's name. He put it on speaker, his entire body tensing. What have you got? I've got the whole damn thing, Kelsey's voice was sharp, devoid of emotion but crackling with the energy of a successful hunt. The primary source for the news story wasn't Helen, Nanny number 17. She was just the confirmation. The real damage came from Nanny number 15, a woman named Maria Sanchez. I found her an hour ago. Did she talk? Cole pressed, leaning forward. She sang, Kelsey replied. And it's not what you think. Her 7-year-old son has a rare neurological condition. He needed an experimental surgery, one that insurance wouldn't touch. The cost was astronomical, life-changing money. Kelsey paused for effect. Julian Vance's people found her. They didn't threaten her, they saved her. They paid for the entire procedure, the travel, the aftercare. All of it. In exchange, she had to sign a sworn affidavit exaggerating her experiences here. They fed her the specific language, volatile, uncontrollable, emotionally disturbed. The revelation landed with sickening weight. This wasn't just a disgruntled employee. This was a desperate mother, backed into an impossible corner, her love for her child weaponized against his. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. She's riddled with guilt, Kelsey continued. She saw the news, the circus outside your house, and it broke her. She thought it would be an internal report, not a public crucifixion. She's ready to cooperate fully. Do we have proof? Nora asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ironclad, Kelsey confirmed. She's already forwarded me the wire transfer confirmations from Argent Ventures and the encrypted emails from Vance's lead counsel. They spell out the entire quid pro quo. It's a direct line from Vance's money to the lies on that broadcast. Cole leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with horrifying clarity. The media blitz, the timing of the CPS report, the staged outrage, it was all a meticulously constructed theater of war. The CPS visit wasn't just a consequence of the media story, it was the intended climax. Vance had built a stage and was now sending in a government official to witness the final act of his character assassination. He looked at Nora, a new hard light in his eyes. The exhaustion and fear had been burned away, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. They had been planning to defend themselves, to prove their worth to a stranger. But that was playing Vance's game. We've been preparing for an assessment, Cole said, his voice low and dangerous. But this isn't an assessment. It's an ambush. Nora met his gaze, her expression firm, her own resolve hardening into steel. Then we stopped trying to survive the ambush, she replied. We turned the tables on the man who set the trap. The defensive plan was scrapped. They were no longer the victims waiting for a verdict. They were going on the offense. The silence that reclaimed the Preston estate was profound, a stark contrast to the orchestrated chaos of an hour before. The satellite vans had vanished, the last drone had buzzed away, and the quiet of the Atherton Hills settled back over the property like a comforting blanket. Inside, Ms. Anya Sharma closed her notebook with a soft, final snap. The stern mask of the official assessor had dissolved, replaced by a look of unfeigned respect as she looked from Cole and Nora to the 3 boys standing quietly beside them. Mr. Preston, Miss Cassidy, she began, her gaze steady and clear. My report will state for the record that this family is not in crisis. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. On the contrary, it is a model of resilience under a malicious and calculated external attack. The case is closed, effective immediately. The relief in the room was a physical thing, a collective, silent exhalation. But outside, the storm had just begun for Julian Vance. The press packet Cole had released was a digital bombshell. The story of corporate sabotage and the cruel blackmail of a desperate mother ignited a firestorm through the financial world. The news of his tactics reverberated from news alerts to boardrooms, leading to an immediate and furious shareholder revolt. His empire, built on exploiting weakness, crumbled under the weight of his own hubris. For the first time in 6 agonizing months, the great glass walls of their home didn't feel like a cage, but a sanctuary. The Preston family was finally safe. 6 months later, the garden of the Preston estate felt like a different world. Perched on the cliffside, with the vast blue expanse of the Pacific stretching to the horizon, the air was filled not with tension, but with the bright, easy sound of laughter. A large blanket was spread on the immaculate lawn, laden with the happy remnants of a picnic. The boys, now 7, were no longer haunted soldiers guarding a fortress of grief. They were just boys, happy, well-adjusted, and chasing a soccer ball with a joyous abandon that made Cole's heart ache with gratitude. They spoke of their mother now with smiles, sharing memories of her favorite color or the funny way she used to sing in the car. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had been woven into the fabric of their love, a source of connection rather than a chasm of anger. As the boys collapsed in a heap of giggles on the grass, Cole looked at Nora. Her face was warmed by the late afternoon sun, and her eyes held the same deep, quiet strength that had saved them all. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles over her knuckles. Then, in one smooth, deliberate motion, he got down on one knee. He opened his mouth to speak, to try and find the words for the immeasurable gratitude and love he felt, but he never got the chance. A chorus of 3 small, excited voices erupted from the blanket. "Say yes, Nora. Say yes." Leo, Max, and Owen were all sitting up, their faces alight with pure, unadulterated joy. Nora's eyes filled with happy tears as she looked from their eager faces back to Cole's. She didn't need a speech. Their new beginning was already here. "Yes," she laughed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Of course, yes." This wasn't the story of a broken family being mended. It was the story of a new, stronger one being forged in the fires of adversity. The Prestons found their happily ever after, not by ignoring their pain, but by facing it with love and courage. The world is full of people like Julian Vance who profit from misery. Subscribe now if you want to be part of a community that celebrates hope and resilience over cynicism and greed.